Up next, the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. After this message.
Evergreen's calling.
Now that doctors and patients have discovered the many benefits of hemp-derived CBD, Alpine Miracle's nano-emulsion CBD formula is one of the most bioavailable on the market today. It's 100% THC-free, so you can order it online anywhere in the U.S. Order yours today at alpinemiracle.com. Scientists are just beginning to understand its essential role in maintaining optimal health. Get yours today. Use the code REPORTER and receive 10% off. Don't wait. Get it now at alpinemiracle.com. And now, it's time for the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. Listen in as Snowden interviews cannabis industry pioneers, marijuana experts, policymakers, medical practitioners, patients, and other amazing individuals with compelling stories to share. It all happens right now. Here's the Cannabis Reporter, Snowden Bishop.
Welcome back to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. I'm your host, Snowden Bishop, and I'm grateful you've joined us today. If you were with us last week, I want to say thank you for indulging me the opportunity to talk about a topic as serious as the suicide epidemic. There seems to be a spiral of shocking events swirling around in news cycles these days, and I can't help but feel as though American leadership has lost a moral compass, or at the very least has been desensitized to the barrage of shocking news that we have come to accept as a normal. As a member of the media, I feel it's important not to ignore our societal misgivings, as doing so would only really perpetuate the denial and, in a way, give it credence. But that said, I also feel as though good news or stories that inspire us to do better as a society don't get enough coverage. One of the reasons I love talking about the cannabis movement is that it was born from compassion. Every day we learn about more miracles taking place and ways in which cannabis, whether industrial hemp or medical marijuana, or even adult use cannabis, offers healing. And I'm not just talking about medical science, although we know it's critically important to human health, body, mind, and soul, but for also the environmental and economic benefits. The health of our nation depends upon it. Not to mention the improvement cannabis can bring to society at large. Cannabis is a compassionate plant, and compassion is what has propelled the movement to reverse prohibition and pave the way for our healthier, more sustainable, and prosperous future. That's the topic of today's show, and we have a familiar guest. He's an ER attending physician who's also board certified in wound care before becoming a true pioneer in the field of medical marijuana. He's principal of Compassionate Certification Centers, which now has a half a dozen clinics with more on the way. You know him best as the host of our Medical Marijuana Minute, and I am thrilled to say Dr. Bryan Doner is in the house. Welcome back.
Oh, hi, Snowden. Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure, and I'm glad we have a chance to talk again.
Oh, me too. So I just have to say, I was out at the World Medical Cannabis Conference and Expo in April, and kudos to all of you for such a job well done. I mean, that was an amazing conference, amazing speakers. We had a lot of fun. So congratulations.
Well, thanks so much. It was the second year that we did it, and it was great. It was even better than the year prior. We had more attendees, more patients, more researchers, more doctors, really just everybody from the industry. And I think it went off very well. And the timing with Pennsylvania's medical marijuana program was great. So thanks for the positive feedback.
Oh, yeah. Well, we had a great time, and we met a lot of amazing people. And I think that it has grown so much. And in this year, I noticed that there were just a lot more speakers, a lot more exhibitors, and definitely well worth the trip out to Pennsylvania. So thank you for that. I was really eager to touch bases with you because I wanted to hear what was going on with all of the clinics and kind of delve into, some of the good news that's happening in Pennsylvania, because I think that From all outward appearances, it seems as though they're doing things right in Pennsylvania. And I think that it could be instructive for a lot of the states that are now regulation.
Sure. Well, and it's been really a great experience from a standpoint in Pennsylvania. We started seeing patients, at least our organization, really at the end of 2017 in December. And since that time, there's been about 25,000 patients that have been certified for medical cannabis in Pennsylvania. So when you look at other states, for example, Illinois, it took them almost 3 years to reach that number. So it's been a tremendous response. There's been over 500 physicians that are listed on the state registry. So it's really taken off. And the advisory board in Pennsylvania just added some additional conditions, one of which was opiate addiction therapy, which is really a big step in the medical cannabis industry. And we hope that it'll be a role model for other states. And during the time, we've been trying to expand and open our compassionate certification centers in order to keep up with demand. And we've had an unbelievable patient response that people have just been very hopeful, very happy. And some of the responses we've seen with folks in their treatment plan has been tremendous.
You know, we've talked a lot about opiate addiction lately because it has reached this threshold of epidemic in this country. And it really is quite astonishing to me. Every doctor that we talk to about opiate addiction and cannabis, there's a consensus there that this is an exit drug. And it's so important for people to begin to understand that, especially from the treatment center perspective, because often, if they're testing people for THC in their system, there's this really negative feedback loop that's happening. Have you found that people are becoming more open to the idea that cannabis is an exit drug?
I would say yes. I have seen that, particularly clinicians. And to be honest, part of my opinion about this, Snowden, is the fact that the opiate epidemic in our country has reached critical proportions. And really, it wasn't getting any better despite our best shot at intervention. So when you have medical cannabis as an alternative treatment option, I think it does really open people's eyes. And medical cannabis has the ability to do a few things when you're talking about opiate addiction or potential substitution or exit therapy. I think number one, it has the ability to treat people's symptoms of withdrawal so that it can make the process of opiate withdrawal more tolerable for patients. Symptoms such as nausea, anxiety, abdominal pain, cramping, diarrhea, all these things can be lessened whenever you integrate a medical cannabis regimen. I think there's research now being done, and really what we hope as well is that potentially medical cannabis can help act on the psychological addiction portion of that as well. So should that be the case and the research turn out to be as we hoped, you really have an ideal treatment plan in that not only can you treat the actual symptoms, but you can go to the root cause of the problem. Which then brings us to could this potentially be beneficial for other substance abuse or addiction type issues such as alcoholism or whatever it may be. So it's a tremendous step in the right direction when we're talking about both the opiate crisis as well as medical cannabis in our country. And being a native of Pennsylvania, I am obviously very proud that it seems that our state is starting to lead the way from that end.
Yeah, and I've quoted you a number of times saying that as an ER physician, there is not a day that goes by where you don't see someone coming in for an opiate overdose. Do you think that's getting better, or is it still pretty much the case?
I'll be honest with you. In my experience, things haven't changed dramatically yet. I mean, I think I could feel very comfortable in saying that I couldn't go throughout a shift without seeing one at least issue with regard to opiate addiction or overdose or withdrawal. I think that the potential's there, but for us to be able to sort of integrate things on a large scale on a national basis, I don't think necessarily that's been done yet. And unfortunately, it's largely it's affecting some of our younger populations. So You see really young adults that are unfortunately losing their lives, and it's affecting their families' lives. So I haven't seen much of a difference yet, but I'm very hopeful, and I think Pennsylvania, as I said, will be on the front line to see how this really plays off, and if medical cannabis does have as much of a positive benefit on the opiate situation as we think it will.
Well, certainly as more and more doctors become familiar with the utility of cannabis for treating pain, and I know that that's something that you know a lot about as well, but it just seems like a much gentler way to address some chronic pain issues. And from what I've read, obviously it's working for a lot of patients and then preventing that whole opiate addiction in the first place. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. There has been some studies out there, and there's been research to show that cannabis can be a very effective treatment, particularly in chronic intractable or neuropathic pain. I just saw a recent study done in Europe that had about 3,000 patients enrolled from a wide age varieties that showed medical cannabis had a much greater therapeutic effect on controlling pain than opiates. Patients who were on medical cannabis required a lower dose at a less frequent interval of opiates, and that medical cannabis was actually much safer, particularly in the elderly patients, than opiates. So when you look at the literature out there that we have, both that fails to show the adequacy of opiates controlling chronic pain, and then some of the more recent literature showing the support of medical marijuana controlling chronic pain as an alternative treatment plan, I think it's an ideal situation. And as you said, if we can now integrate that into our healthcare plan, that patients never are started on the opiates, or they don't need that type of medication, then that's the biggest win for all of us.
That's probably right on the money. It's a matter of convincing physicians that this is a great alternative. And in Pennsylvania, are you seeing that your colleagues in the profession are getting a lot more open to it?
I would say yes. I think that my colleagues and peers in general have become much more open to medical marijuana. There's no question about that when you see the response, even compared to where it was a year ago. I think the medical cannabis as a treatment for opiate addiction or a substitution therapy is one of the things that physicians are still trying to grasp, right? I think the general consensus when you look at this from the outside in is that you're robbing Peter to feed Paul, as the saying goes, or that you're trading one substance for another. I think, in fact, when you actually look at the science and the physiology behind how those two different classes of medications work, I think you can see that that's not really true. So it goes back to something that you and I have discussed on a number of occasions, Snowden, which is education, right? And I think one of the ways that gets done is through research. So again, I think Pennsylvania, they've built in a really robust research program into their medical marijuana regulations, and I think that we can use those type of tools to support our ideas and hypotheses, and then give that feedback back to clinicians and patients alike, so that they can understand that there is real scientific support behind this.
One of the reasons that the word compassion came to mind, it seems as laws go with new states that are regulating, Pennsylvania has absolutely been a lot more compassionate in terms of the way that they've approached like the qualifying conditions, and it seems that a lot of people could actually learn from that. It's just, compassion really is at the core of the movement, obviously, because we're trying to find a gentler way to treat people with chronic conditions. And in terms of the harshness of the drug itself, it's really low on that scale of danger to the human body. And it's like treating the body with kid gloves instead. I'm just curious how you feel about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on your first point to talk about the word compassion and how it's integrated into medical cannabis, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it's one of the things that's often overlooked when you look way back at the beginning of some of this in the title of the Compassionate Care Act, and when you look at medical cannabis, and particularly in our country, it was the thing that's always very profound to me is that it was a patient-initiated movement, right? That these are generally speaking disease processes or entities that us as healthcare providers, the healthcare system, haven't had good treatments for. Our treatments were either ineffective or, as you were alluding to, toxic, right? So patients. The medical cannabis movement was really initiated by the patients themselves rather than big pharma or doctors or researchers. I think it was born out of that need for compassion and out of the need to find alternative treatments where they don't otherwise exist. So, and I think for us, when we integrated the name into our centers, it was very, very important because that's really what this whole movement is based upon. And when you keep that idea in mind, it can help really sort of right the ship or guide your path, as they say. So I'm, personally, it's a very meaningful word to me. I think you see it very frequently in the cannabis industry, and I think it's for good reason. And I think it's really the true nature of its term, compassion, and it fits in perfectly with medical cannabis therapy and what we're going for with our patients.
And also, on a federal level too, it seems that if we can convince the people who are in position to pass the legislation that's been pending for years, the Compassionate Care Act, for example, the federal legislation, or the Carers Act, which has compassion in its definition. I wish that there was a way that we could convince lawmakers on that level that the dangers to not passing cannabis legislation are greater than the dangers of passing it. And they need to hear from medical professionals like yourself. What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I want to agree with you that I wish it would be one of my great wishes that we could convince some of the naysayers right now about this. But whenever I talk to people with regard to trying to convince them, to me this always comes down to some of the science that we have. And as you said, the plain and simple truth with regard to medical cannabis therapy is this: that it can be very effective in treating certain ailments that we have just really scratched the surface of. And on top of that, it is a very, very benign medical treatment. When you look at it, as you had mentioned, the adverse effects, the toxicities, they pale in comparison to traditional medications, even the over-the-counter medications that we have. I've always been, I'll never forget at our convention, Dr. Cyril Wecht, who's one of the most world famous forensic pathologists, said that in the tens of thousands of autopsies he's ever done, never once has acute cannabinoid toxicity been listed as a cause of death. So when you have a medication like this that doesn't have a lethal dose, there's technically, you don't need an antidote. There's no overdoses. It's processed through the liver. Really, all of these things that show a safety profile that is unheralded. So when you take that in conjunction with a treatment plan that can be effective for people, to me, that's very convincing. Unfortunately, I think some of the powers that be and the driving forces behind legislation and regulations, particularly on a federal level, potentially have other reasons in mind with regard to this. That I don't think it's all driven with regard to patient care and patient access. So really, what I would say to them when I had the chance would be just to show them that what's happened in our country. When you look at over the past, whatever it may be, 5, 6, however many years, the spread of medical cannabis across our country, the overwhelming positive response, and the numbers of lives that it's changed in a positive way, I think that speaks for themselves. And at some point, legislators and regulators are going to be have their hands forced by the amount of people that are really supporting medical cannabis.
Well, if you touched on this and you didn't actually say it, and I'm not afraid to say it, and that is that there is an enormous lobby of the pharmaceutical industry that is paying for campaigns. And if the goal is to get elected, ultimately with the public demand, that's going to outweigh whatever campaign finance they're going to get from a pharmaceutical company to keep suppressing this law. And on the side of the Justice Department, it's very confusing to me as to why there's not more openness to this and why they're fighting so diligently to keep control over cannabis in Schedule 1, because clearly it's there for false reasons. I mean, Schedule 1 was put there for a reason. It's for drugs that have absolutely zero medical utility and a very high potential for abuse and that kills people or causes a criminal element that is just out of control. So when you look at that, it just feels as though there's absolutely no reasoning for perpetuating the falsehood about cannabis. And it's a wish of mine that they would just get out of the way as well, because they do not have elections to worry about. They are appointed officials. And if you were to sit down in a room, let's say with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, what would be the first thing you'd say to him?
Sure. I think the first thing I would say to him in that situation would be, tell me why you don't support this. So, because to me, that's what I would want to know, that I would want to hear the reasons directly why they don't support this, and then really address those head on would be, so that rather than me trying to, I guess, push my agenda per se, maybe to address somebody else's, what they see as the shortcomings on this. That would be really the way that I would approach this, And Snowden, I agree with you with regard to sort of the political currents and the socioeconomic currents behind all this. The scheduling of marijuana, in my opinion, is criminal where it is now. Particularly whenever you think that there's medications that big pharma produces, such as Marinol, that's 100% synthetic THC. That's a Schedule 3 drug, but yet the naturally occurring compounds, which are by default much more benign, are listed as Schedule 1. So it really doesn't make logical sense whenever you look at it and think about it. But I guess really what I approach it with people, whether it's Jeff Sessions or one of my other peers or even one of my patients, is that what are your concerns? What are your fears? Why do you feel differently than I do about this? And then I try to address those as much as I can head on and on an individual basis.
I think that's really smart, because often in this movement, I think one of the things that turned the mainstream off to it initially was the amount of criticism coming from a movement. I mean, look at the vegan movement, and I was vegan 15 years, and I know that passion that goes behind it. And I think that I can talk about myself in that regard, because when I first became vegan, I was hypercritical of those who didn't embrace it. And I know that the way I approached the subject would sort of turn people off to listening to it. And I think that your idea to actually have a discussion with someone and embrace their fears and address those one at a time, you're basically inviting them in a way that's law of attraction, as opposed to, like you're forcing an agenda.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And I think it sometimes can be very effective when you do that, because as you said, you're coming from a position at that point of support, and you're really not trying to push an agenda on somebody. Rather, you're trying to help them understand, the facts that they have. But the bottom line, I've seen numbers up to 89% of all Americans support medical cannabis. So the bottom line and the truth is that most of our fellow countrymen and women absolutely support medical cannabis, and that has become the majority, right? And as the days and months and years tick by, you see that even more and more and more. And it's getting to the point now, even politicians that you have seen that folks that maybe before were completely on one side, now all of a sudden have changed their tune. When you start to see that, I think you're going to start to see big changes in the system. And usually when it happens rapidly too. So I'm personally pretty encouraged by where we are compared to where we were a few years ago, and in the direction it looks like we're heading for the most part.
Well, we saw that recently too, when Mitch McConnell came out, and he's always been sort of a fan of hemp being from Kentucky. but to also see like former speaker John Boehner come forth and say that he believes that we need to do something about it. And I think it is encouraging people to take a fresh look at it, definitely. And I find that very, very promising. And I think starting with hemp is a really good thing. But, every time I see this step forward, I see another monkey wrench go into it. Like, for example, Senator Grassley proposed some amendments to the hemp bill that basically prohibited anyone from using hemp for anything that would extract its resins, oils, salts, anything. So that would basically render it would be like, why grow hemp if you can't use it for biofuel or use its salts for making or resins for making plastics or making paper or making medicine or food. It's like, okay, well, if you define hemp as being just a plant without any of those things that you can take from it, why bother? And it just seemed like such a ridiculous exercise in futility. If you're going to pass a hemp law, don't make all of its parts illegal or keep them in Schedule 1, because then why would a farmer grow hemp if he couldn't sell it to use for industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, and it seems sort of silly to me. And particularly, what something like that does is that it really bites the hand that feeds you. So, and by your intentions of taking some of the exposure to the cannabinoids out of this, you're limiting things on different ends that you never even considered. I think your analogy with regard to the biofuels and things like that is spot on. That it sometimes can be the law of unintended consequences as well, right? So I think people need to be very careful about what they're asking for. And I think the people who write this legislation and these regulations, they need to have a better understanding, right? They really need to have an understanding of the cannabis industry as a whole, how cannabis can be used medicinally, and then outside of that as well, because this isn't just a black and white or cut and dry situation. There are numerous uses, particularly for hemp, even outside the medicinal realm, that shouldn't be limited either.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about compassion, and if you just look at hemp and look at that hemp legislation, it's not just compassion in the medical sense. It's compassion in enabling the U.S. farmer to get out from under the thumb of Monsanto, for example, and that merry-go-round of Roundup, and having to use all of these chemicals just to make a seed bloom. Hemp doesn't need all of that stuff to grow, and the compassion is for, anybody who wants to have a fresh economic advantage presented to them. And hemp has so much potential for that as well. And I just think that in this country, we need to start embracing that compassionate way of looking at these laws. And I really have such an admiration for people who took the risk early on, even when there was still more stigma associated with it, and Bryan, that's why I love what you've done in Pennsylvania, because in terms of that state, you truly are a pioneer. And I think that you were one of the first ones out of the gate to offer certification clinics and to start educating people, and coming from that emergency room medicine, and you were a doctor's doctor in there in that way. And I think that for medical professionals who did take that early leap, even embracing the subject before it became legal in their state, really deserves some kudos. So kudos.
Well, thank you. I greatly appreciate that. It's always nice to hear. There was times when it's been very difficult. There's times when it's still difficult for me, that you deal with some repercussions and some feedback. But there's no doubt in my mind that this is the right thing to do. And I see every day in our clinics when I see these patients that people come in, and this is giving them hope where hope was otherwise taken away. And I think that concept and that idea fits right in with that word compassion that you and I have been talking about so much. And I've had some of our doctors, one of our physicians, a great friend of mine who's worked with me in the emergency department for probably about 6 years. When I asked him about this over a year and a half ago, he really wasn't interested, and he sort of looked at me funny. And as time went by and he started to see some of these results himself, he started to see he had a family member that responded well. He came to be more open. He now works with us and sees and certifies patients and helps take care of their treatment plan. And I'll never forget after his first shift, what he said to me was, he said, Bryan, he's like, I never realized how much hope this is giving these patients and how much they really need and deserve this. And it's so true. And I see it every day. And I think as more people see that with their own two eyes, or their brother, sister, mother, father, friend has an experience with that and shares it, the more ground, every step like that forward we take. And you're seeing it happen so much more. So it's really a neat thing. And I'm just really excited to be able to be a part of it in the ground level and try to help guide policy and regulations and really set the tone for medical marijuana in the future and for our kids.
It really is offering so much promise for the future. You're right. And promise for patients. I can't tell you how many people I meet who say, oh, I had stage 4 cancer, or, I couldn't walk. I met a guy here in Arizona recently who had been bitten by a Gila monster. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Gila monster, but it's poison. When you're bitten by a Gila monster, it's like a neurotoxin, and it has permanent effects. And he said that before someone introduced him to cannabis, he couldn't walk, and it debilitated him so much that he was on permanent disability. And today he's working, and he said that before cannabis, he had absolutely zero hope. I mean, they were giving him drugs like you can't imagine. He was on, 20 pills a day, different pills for different things, for anxiety, for the pain that he was suffering, and also to relax his muscles, which were seized, and, other medicines that just weren't working. And so this guy has hope for the first time. And that, to me, is just so touching. And we can't come out of the gate and say that cannabis is going to cure these things. We can all get in trouble for saying things like that until the United States has the proof it needs from its sanctioned medical institutes. We've got plenty of research overseas, right? But
Absolutely.
But the anecdotal evidence is there. It does help people. And whether it's the placebo effect or not, who knows at this point? But if it works, it works. What can you say?
Absolutely. And the people are feeling better, right? And whether it's pain, seizures, autism, nausea, appetite stimulation, people are feeling better. And the importance of a healthy mind when you're talking about treating all of these type of conditions can't be understated, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a recent experience I had, Snowden, where one of my two best friends in the entire world, I've known him since I've been, 9 years old, super close with his family. His mom was diagnosed with metastatic lung cancer. She had been a smoker for a long time. She had gotten started on a chemo drug, and she was getting to the point where she wasn't eating. She was just losing weight, having to go in for IV fluids and IV nutrition. And it was to the point where they were considering, stopping the chemotherapy, and they were really sort of worried about, the end is closing near. My friend had asked me if I would talk to them, and these are people I've known. They've known me my entire life. So about as straight-laced as could be. The long story short, I went over, I talked to her. I explained to her the state program, sort of how the science behind everything works, almost just like one of my patients. And we started her on a medical cannabis regimen, a very gentle one that was non-psychoactive. And we worked our way up sort of to the preparations that we thought would be the most beneficial. And lo and behold, I just got a call from them 2 days ago and talked to her that her appetite's now much, much better. She gained 3 pounds in the last week. They were able to go out and enjoy a dinner and a movie somewhere. So that was probably the most impactful story that I remember recently, right? And it was something as simple. It wasn't like we cured seizures. It wasn't like her cancer went away, but the fact that she just felt better and how much it made her family feel better was a complete win. And it was sort of a profound thing. So just the fact of helping somebody feel better in and of itself can really be a driving force when you're talking about somebody's treatment plan. And I think at this point, there's no question that the medical cannabis can do that, and it can do so safely, and and the question, I get it all the time from doctors, or the statement that there's, quote, not enough research. And usually when that happens, I like to take a step back and say, well, let's really examine that statement, right? And what truly qualifies, quote, enough, end quote, research? Is it, when a doctor says that, is it not enough research for them personally? Is this a government level? So sometimes these generalized statements that I think we make over and over and over again, when we examine them in detail, maybe aren't as true as they were some time ago.
You're right. No, that's absolutely true. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of these pharmaceuticals, while maybe they do have proven effects to reverse certain conditions, they don't make people feel good. So they're not feeling well when they're healing. So yeah, just the discovery of the endocannabinoid system is such a miracle of science, and it shows so much promise. And I think that in and of itself has also helped to soften the blow for some people who've been so staunchly opposed, and you're right. If they say there's not enough research, and you go to pubmeds.gov, where a lot of these studies are available for public consumption, you type in the word cannabis. What you even said this once, you come up with like 22,000 studies, and well, some of them are just in petri dishes in a laboratory. Some of them are human clinical studies, all done overseas where there aren't so many restrictions. But it really is quite astonishing how much research there is. And for anyone in lawmaking, and they want evidence to support a position of legalizing medical cannabis, all they have to do is go there. So to say that there's not enough research just seems like such an ingenuous statement, and maybe it's not in NIDA, but our U.S. institutions that the government puts so much credence in, they're all opposed to it as well, because who knows why? Maybe they're being paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. Who knows what the reason is? But, it's science is science, and you cannot dispute facts. So
yeah, that's absolutely right. And this is one of those things that whether you believe in Darwin or God, whatever your cup of tea or flavor, our body was set up naturally with this endocannabinoid system. Our body makes these chemicals naturally. You and I have talked about before, how the body's own endocannabinoid anandamide is critical in the process of conception and the adherence of the fertilized egg to the uterine wall. And really, without cannabinoids, human life as we exist would not be. And that's a profound thing to say, but it's absolutely true. And we know that. We know that with beyond a shadow of a doubt now. So, and I have a feeling that we're going to, as a society, we're going to look back at this in 5, 10, 15 years, whatever it may be, and somewhat shake our head and smile and say, boy, it really took us a long time to get with the program and see how beneficial cannabis can be to the human body. And as you and I have said before, we've really just scratched the surface of this. So it's going to be just tremendously exciting to see where this goes in the future and how many more people it can really help.
Yeah, and a lot of people still aren't aware that the human body actually produces its own cannabinoids when it's in contact with food substances that promote that. And a lot of food substances already have some cannabinoids in them, but I'm not sure if it was you or someone else who told me that even mother's milk has is loaded with cannabinoids because the baby needs that to develop its immune system and proper growth responses and protection of the brain and development of the brain. It's pretty astonishing when you think about it. It really is.
Absolutely. You're definitely right, Snowden. And sort of piggybacking off of that, some of the things that we're finding out now is that some of the medications we've been using in modern medicine for some time have likely been acting on the endocannabinoid system, and we just didn't even know it. I think you and I had talked about one time, there's a specific class of drugs called SERMs. They're selective estrogen reuptake modulators. And there's been some really interesting research that show that, in fact, these drugs act on the endocannabinoid system, and that's partly what gives them their therapeutic properties. When you look up this drug on an Hippocrates or whatever it may be, the physician's desk reference, it doesn't say anything about its mechanism of action having anything to do with its role in the endocannabinoid system. But yet, we found this out in retrospect. So if we found this for one class of medications that have been around for a long time, how many more actually act on the endocannabinoid system, and we don't even know it? So to me, it's a really, really interesting thing that maybe the endocannabinoid system has been helping us out long term, and we just didn't even really know it. So it's a pretty neat thing to talk about.
You know what? That is pretty fascinating when you think about it. And what an incredible field of study that would be for someone who had the resources to do it. Just to go back and look at some of these drugs that are effective for people and to find out if that really is the reason or not.
Right.
It would be a fascinating study. Certainly.
Yep. I agree. I'd love to do that one.
I know, right? It would be fantastic. I'd like to read it. And it's interesting that cannabis was once in the U.S. pharmacopoeia. And I don't know, have they added it back? Do you have any idea?
That's an interesting question. I'd have to go look and see specifically if they have. Obviously, if they haven't done it yet, they need to. But I brought this point up in a recent lecture that I gave, and really, the first slide that I started off with was sort of some pictures of vintage cannabis products that used to be used in modern medicine regularly, right? These tinctures and these oils that were used to treat pain, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, and they were accepted in modern medicine, right? And then you had the change of sort of the overall feel in our country. And I think, reefer madness back in I think it was the late 30s, and then progressing through there, all of a sudden marijuana took on this really different, sinister light that before that never really existed. And this is information that's readily available to everybody out there. But when you look at the history of our country, really, cannabis has been used therapeutically for much longer than it's been ostracized, right? So hopefully now we're getting past that brief period of us sort of calling this the bastard stepchild, if you would, So my hope is that we've gotten past that, and we're sort of getting back to the olden days where this was an accepted treatment in the healthcare system.
Yeah, even George Washington enjoyed his cup of cannabis tea in the evening, which I found an interesting tidbit. That's in his diary, actually.
Right.
Yeah. Cannabis was so much a part of the foundation of this nation, and it created so much prosperity for everyone. And it was absolutely vital to winning wars and feeding people. Mother's apple pie was made with cannabis filling. So we need to get back to that nature too, I think. And in medicine, we've come with all of these pharmaceutical drugs that treat symptoms. And interestingly, the cannabis plant treats not only the symptoms, but it helps our internal processes, from what we're learning now. And I mean, the science is just fascinating. It's truly fascinating. So
yeah, it really is, and I think we know that we, in order for our body to function properly or be in homeostasis, that cannabinoids play a critical role, and I think that's becoming accepted. And you see with patients really, one of the beyond medical cannabis, one of the things that I see personally in my clinical practice, it's different than when I just started now, is that patients are really taking their own healthcare now into their own hands more so, right? So that rather than going to the doctor and the doctor telling you exactly what to do and here's a pill and go take this, the patients are learning of what's the best treatment plan for me. And really, what's the best way for me to go about this, right? And then using physicians as a tool or a mediator or clinical provider. So, and I think that's a really, really important thing, not only for medical cannabis, but for all of healthcare. The fact that patients are taking more responsibility and a more active role in their own well-being, and only good things will come from something like that.
Well, and I think that cannabis is a good preventative measure. We're finding that people who sustain brain injuries, what they're finding now in some of the study to give more credence to is that a lot of these things are caused by deficiencies. Have you been hearing this as well?
Yes, yeah, I think that's one of the theories sort of around there that to me has been very interesting, right? That certain people and in certain disease processes and entities and manifestation of symptoms, that they may be related to deficiencies in specific cannabinoids, right? So that to me is a very interesting sort of area of study. So that way you can really start to pinpoint that these measures, as you said, can be preventative, right? So that not only that this can be, it's basically supplemental therapy if you look at it that way. So we're replenishing where the body needs to be in order, as I said before, sort of function at its optimum capacity in homeostasis. So and I've had discussions with a few researchers about that, and it seems like that there's more studies being geared towards that now, that these sort of specific consequences of each individual cannabinoid and their properties when they're not there in high enough quantities, or alternatively if they're there in too high quantities, right? So, and then what are those effects that those cannabinoids can have on another one, for example, right? What effect does CBD have on THC, or does THC have on CBG, and this interaction of them together? I think that type of thing is fascinating, and it seems like a big area where research is going into now.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I appreciate your insights so much, Dr. Doner. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really enlightening conversation.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, Snowden. I always appreciate it. And I think it's tremendous that the message that you guys are able to get out to everybody there. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, you definitely will, because you'll be back for our Medical Marijuana Minute. And I know you've been incredibly busy lately. So with the clinics, and obviously I wish you tons of luck with the additional clinics that you're opening up. I think it's amazing. And in case there's anybody in Pennsylvania listening right now, Compassionate Certification Centers, you've got at least 6 now, maybe 7, and more to come. Yep. Correct? Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Well,
sorry to interrupt that.
Yeah, that's okay. So I'll definitely put some information about that online, and we have to say thank you also for the support. You guys have been fantastic in helping us to get the word out and supporting what we do, and it's so appreciated. I can tell you that. So,
it's our pleasure. Our pleasure. We appreciate the opportunity to working with you guys, and we really feel like we have a fantastic relationship with you guys. So we cherish it as well, Snowden. So thank you.
Thank you. So once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Dr. Bryan Doner, for sharing his insights and knowledge with us today. And if you'd like to learn more about Compassionate Certification Centers and the work that he's doing, visit us online at thecannabisreporter.com. Click podcast to find today's show. And there I will post information and links to his website. And we have so many others to thank. First, I would like to express our gratitude for our radio sponsors, Alpine Miracle Health Terra and Canosphere. We certainly couldn't be doing this without you. I'd also like to thank Eric Goodall for our theme song, Evergreen, our producers and personnel here at the Cannabis Reporter for always making us shine. I'd also like to thank our program directors at XRQK Radio Network and Society Bites Radio for distributing our show. And last but not least, thanks to all of you for listening. I'm your host, Snowden Bishop, inviting you to join me again next week, same time, same place, for another episode of the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. Until we meet again, be safe, stay informed, share what you've learned, and make it a great day.
Evergreen's calling. Evergreen's calling. Evergreen's calling.
Now that doctors and patients have discovered the many benefits of hemp-derived CBD, Alpine Miracles Nano-Emulsion CBD formula is one of the most bioavailable on the market today. It's 100% THC-free, so you can order it online anywhere in the U.S. Order yours today at alpinemiracle.com. Scientists are just beginning to understand its essential role in maintaining optimal health. Get yours today. Use the code REPORTER and receive 10% off. Don't wait. Get it now at alpinemiracle.com.
You're busy, running around from work to kids to evening events. Healthcare shouldn't be adding to your daily running around. Simplify your healthcare with Healthterra. For only $15 per month per individual or $18 per month per family with up to 9 kids, by the way, you can eliminate doctor office visits with 24/7 access to doctors via phone, video, or the mobile app. Not only do you get prescriptions filled over the phone, but save up to 85% on those prescriptions. This is a supplemental plan and not insurance. Healthcare made easy. Healthterra.com.